Welcome to the Super Friends Review Podcast. I am your co-host, Trevor Aspenson, and I'm joined by my good friend, John Strand. John, how are you?
I'm doing well. Happy to finally get started here.
And I'm joined by my nemesis, Troy Birch. How are you doing, Troy?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here as well.
All right, and today we are reviewing one of the most forgotten movies probably the past 20 years, Fantastic Four, 2005, starring Johan Griffith, Jessica Alba, Michael Chiklis, Chris Evans, and Julian McMahon. And now before we get started, this is our first recording. This is our first podcast, so just probably want to let the listeners and viewers know just who we are and what we're about. I'll start. I'm Trevor Aspenson. I'm a big comic book movie fan. I've been into pretty much anything comic book media related since I've been a little kid, besides actually deep dive into comics. I was about 2-3 years old when all the animated series came out for Batman, X-Men, Spider-Man. They really got me into all of this when I was younger. And obviously Batman '89 came out the year I was born. Just a lot of those influences got me really into all of this type of content. And then ever since the live action boom has been going on, basically since Spider-Man showed that they could be the biggest movies out there. So I've been passionate about them for a long time, and now we're finally doing a podcast on it. How about you, John?
I've got a lot of the same story as you. I started with Batman the Animated Series. I think is the huge one that really got me into it. I remember one of my buddies, Garrick Olerud, could watch a half hour of TV every day, and we always would pick the X-Men animated series, and that's what we would watch. And so those got me pretty deep into the stories, but it wasn't until college in the early 2000s that I really started to dive deep into the comic books. Started to read pretty much everything Marvel was putting out, spending $50-$60 a week at the comic book store before I realized that that was the quickest way to lose my life, basically. But, with Marvel Unlimited, I'm able to pretty much read everything, and so I go a little bit deeper into the comics. As you can see over from my shelf here, I've got some action figures. I got a Namor poster over there. So this is something I get pretty into. I'm a 30-year-old man. I'm a high school teacher, but this is my passion here. So,
yeah, the Namor poster is definitely no mainstream freaking anything. So I got you. And Troy Birch, how about yourself?
And I'm a little different. I'm never big into the comics. I really got into comic book movies just like John, early 2000s when they started coming out with Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. And I just love them. I love all movies, obviously, but I'd say comic book movies are probably my favorite. So a little bit of the oddball in this situation, but still appreciate them.
Probably most situations, I'm assuming, from your perspective.
Yep.
All right, awesome. Well, I think that's a good enough intro for us, guys. Before we jump into any of the actual reviews, I just wanted to go over some of the really basic comic book movie news that's came out in the past couple of weeks. Not a ton of speculation stuff. I'm assuming that stuff we'll just get into when we're in actual reviews. Just a lot of, basic things that have came up, like the Deadpool 2 movie that is coming out this year. Was supposed to originally be coming out at the beginning of June, but it was now moved up a couple weeks to May 18th of this year, which is going to be only a couple weeks after Infinity War comes out. So I'm kind of confused by that. But yeah, thought that was worthy of being talked about. But it also, in that same breath, Gambit and New Mutants, that are also both ran by 20th Century Fox, got moved back at the same time that Deadpool 2 just got moved up. And so the Gambit release date, which is Gambit originally was supposed to come out, do either of you guys remember?
I don't know. That's something that's been so back and forth with losing directors and everything. I don't even know that they've confirmed release dates for that one at all.
For sure. So I know that they back a few years ago, they had it at some ballpark that everyone kind of knew they weren't going to be able to get it around. But it sounded like everything was coming together. They hired the Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl director, Gore Verbinski.
Oh, damn.
He just actually stepped down this past week to be the third director to step down from the from the movie, and so that got actually original release date was supposed to come out in February of next year, and now that got moved back to June of next year. And then this one is the weirdest one, the New Mutants. You guys seen the New Mutants trailer at all?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, dude.
What do you guys think of that? The themes and everything, just the way that movie was looking.
I think it looks great. It's definitely a different twist, going a little more horror. So excited for that.
Yeah, when I saw that trailer, I thought that was so cool. I couldn't believe that they were, putting the X-Men name and property onto that. But I don't know if this is on your news list, but with the Disney and Fox merger, I don't know that Gambit movie. I don't think we're ever going to see come out, and at least in the way that it's created now, right? Because they've built that X-Men universe that you think they've got to just explode and figure out a way to bring it into the MCU, and so I don't know. I don't think that one's ever going to come out.
I am 1,000% there with the Gambit one. I think they keep moving it back. Just to keep Channing Tatum within the project, so when they do blow everything up, he'll probably just maybe be that character in the MCU or whatever. But the New Mutant one, I think, is so interesting. Is one, they obviously are doing all the horror aspect and just trying to have a completely different feel than probably anything I've seen in any comic book movie that's mainstream property. So, because obviously there's different darker things like The Crow and all that stuff for the non-main two publishers. But that movie was supposed to come out in April of this year, so in a few months from now. And earlier this week, they confirmed it to come out February of next year now. So it got moved back 10 months,
Wow.
even though we've seen trailers. We've seen a ton of different marketing for it. So, yeah, I just thought that was really weird. A couple other quick ones to go through. I saw Black Panther actually recently broke the MCU record for the most pre-sale tickets on Fandango, selling Civil War's pre-sales. Which,
yeah, I mean, I can speak about that one a little bit. I had a group of guys that were really not comic book fans. They just, they joined in with the zeitgeist of Marvel now. And as we were driving to Thor Ragnarok, about seeing Thor and we're pumped from the trailers, and then one of the guys in the front was like, yeah, what about that Black Panther movie? And I got psyched and I leaned up in my seat to talk about it, and they all laughed like it was going to be the worst thing that they'd ever seen. And I don't know, I think that makes me happy, because Black Panther was one of those kind of like Ant-Man where I was super jacked about it, but I didn't know what the cachet or like the resonance with the normal movie going crowd was. But I think it shows just the power of the entity that is Marvel, right? Anything they put out, they can make a powerhouse, and the trailers of this movie make it look phenomenal. So I'm psyched about this one.
yeah, the music, the fact that they seem to be having the music aspect be a big part of it, almost like the Guardians of the Galaxy trailers, that it's going to play more into the themes of the movie more than just being music. And obviously Ryan Coogler directing it, who's done Creed, who did Fruitvale Station, both Michael B. Jordan movies, which were freaking amazing. So I'm super stoked for this movie. I think it's going to do just gangbuster numbers, like Thor 3 type shit, just something that people aren't really expecting how big it's going to be. But yeah. And then, so this next one I thought was pretty interesting. I just actually read this earlier today that, so we all know that the DCEU has been having troubles ever since. They started rushing it as fast as they could with BVS, Justice League, Suicide Squad. Somehow they made an amazing movie, Wonder Woman, in the midst of all that. But so Ben Affleck, Sad Affleck, whatever we're going to call him here, he's been kind of on the fence on whether he's joining this next series. And the guy who made the last two Planet of the Apes movies, Dawn and War, which were both, War was amazing. Matt Reeves is his name. He apparently now has Jake Gyllenhaal lined up, like 95% sure that he'll be in the role if Ben Affleck doesn't do it. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm a giant Donnie Darko fan. I'm a giant Jake Gyllenhaal fan. I would be jacked for that.
I agree.
All right. Another small note, production wrap for Infinity War and the Untitled Avengers 4 movie this past week. So both of those are done being filmed. So it means a lot of people's contracts are now up. of all the main stars that has started since 2008. Black Widow's movie actually just got a little further along than it's ever been because they just hired a possible screenwriter for it to write a draft. There's no confirmation if the movie will ever be made or anything. Just somebody to give a pass on a Black Widow script.
I have a question about that, and I don't know if you saw this at all in that article, but I always saw that they wanted to tie Black Widow and Hawkeye together and give them like a spin-off movie. Is this kind of the same as that still, or would this be Black Widow herself?
Yeah, I didn't see anything of that. I don't think they have, even the studios have much information on it. I just think there's been such clamor for Black Widow, especially now that they've seen what Wonder Woman can do at the box office. It shows that a female superhero can lead an entire blockbuster by itself and outperform even the highest of expectations it had. I haven't heard much on the Hawkeye front. The most I've heard is that they're always trying to get him to get a Netflix series. Just because I think that would work best. Honestly, I think that would probably work best for Black Widow's character as well, to go a little darker, show a little more of the grittier sides of the characters. But there was nothing with Hawkeye in the thing I was reading today. Have either of you guys watched the show Runaways?
No.
I have not, no.
I have not either. I know it's supposed to be really good. It's definitely on my queue to watch, but I did see that got renewed for a second season. While at the same time, the 6th season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I haven't watched any of that since like the first 2 episodes of the first season, that's still up in the air, and it's not looking great for the Inhumans show that came out. I've watched about half of the Inhumans, and it doesn't even have like the so good it's bad quality. It is just, you want to claw your eyes out bad.
Just lifeless the whole time.
Watched either of those or any of those or?
I watched the whole first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I thought it was pretty good. Definitely slow. Should not be. I think it's 22 episode runs. Definitely shouldn't be that. But I always say I'll go back to it. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about what we're watching right now, and that'll tell you why I'm not watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but we'll save that.
For sure. All right. Last couple ones, Superman prequel, Krypton, to premiere March 21st on Sci-Fi. I don't know if you guys have any interest about a superhero story about Superman that doesn't have to do with Superman and has to do with his grandpa. No?
Nah.
All right. It's an interesting project. And this last one, I thought just took some real serious journalism by me to be able to come out with this one. Lindsay Lohan wants to play Batgirl in Joss Whedon's Batgirl. Wow. What do you guys think?
Is it about Batgirl after she has retired and been, ravaged by alcoholism, and she's trying to get back into the tights, like the Dark Knight Returns style? Because that'd be great. That'd be great.
Oh, Lindsay. Oh, that's awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's all we really got for news. Just pretty quick sum up. Now I'm going to want to jump into your most anticipated comic book movies list of the year. But before we do that, I just wanted to get a general sense of maybe what you guys have been watching. If you guys have been watching anything good, maybe want the viewers, their listeners to reach out and watch or anything. Anyone can go.
Troy, you go ahead.
I'm not really watching anything new right now. At least off topic of superhero, I did watch Black Sails. Stars, and I really liked it a lot. I think there was 4 seasons, and it was a great series. Great. They definitely had the end picked out before they started writing, so that always makes a series great.
And I've never watched that. What's the general overview of that?
So it's about pirates, and they're on Nassau, some island, but it's basically the whole economy of pirating, and it's written really well. It's acted really well. I highly recommend it.
Heck yeah. How about you, John?
I'm in what I call the CW cycle, because my wife and I are watching Flash and Arrow and Supergirl and Legends of Tomorrow. And I follow a really good kind of outline. I wish I knew the site or the guy that put it together, but they have this connected universe, and so we'll watch one episode of Arrow, and then it'll tell us what comes next in the timeline. Like Flash season 3, episode 3, and so all of those are 22 episode seasons too. So I've got like 80 something episodes to kind of tie me up, and so that's what we've been watching. We took a break and watched It this past weekend, which I think is amazing. And Stephen King is my favorite author, and Katie didn't appreciate it so much. She was a little afraid when she had to go to bed that night.
Yeah, I definitely saw It. I love that. It was scary as heck, but it also had so much of the old 80s tropes of just coming of age kids stuff. That was the thing that makes Stranger Things so good, is what made that movie so good.
Yeah, right. And so Stranger Things, I love it, right? And people watched Stranger Things and then went to see It, and they're like, oh, this is just a ripoff of Stranger Things. But what happened is the Duffer Brothers approached, the Stephen King, I guess, universe or whatever, and said, we want to be the ones to direct It. And they're like, you don't have any clout, you don't have any experience. And so they just went and made It and called it something different, basically.
I didn't know that background. I could pick out all the tropes and stuff going through the show, but I didn't know that that's how it came about.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right, yeah. If you guys want to hear about what I've been watching, I'm through the first 2 seasons of Rick and Morty that I started a little over about 2 weeks ago. I kind of hit a standstill because they don't have the 3rd season on Hulu. But it's I've told this to several people now, but it took me 3 seconds to realize that the show was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, and it took until the episode where Rick and Morty replace dead Rick and Mortys in a different dimension for me to realize this is one of the best written shows I've seen in a really long time.
Yeah, right. I mean, and I don't want to disparage anybody who likes this show, but I think that Rick and Morty is Family Guy that's written well and written for people who have a higher sense of humor than fart jokes and segues that are disparaging towards people and offensive just for the sake of the joke. Like, I think Rick and Morty is offensive and pushes boundaries when it needs to be, but it does so in a way that still kind of tells a story rather than just being this, hyper quick, flash comedy that Family Guy uses.
Oh, what is that? Seth MacFarlane just jumped off our live feed there now. All right, thanks, John. No, I do get what you're saying, though. It is, the Family Guy comparison isn't nice to Family Guy. All right, you guys. Well, let's jump into some more comic book movie stuff. Since we're at the beginning of the year this year, there's a lot of really good content, or at least I'm assuming it's going to be really good content coming out for the comic book movie industry. I wrote down my most anticipated list for comic book movies. Just reading them out by the order they come out by release date. The ones that come out this year are Black Panther, Infinity War, Deadpool 2, The Incredibles 2, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Venom, Dark Phoenix, Aquaman, and an animated feature, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So who wants to jump on their anticipated list first here? Bueller.
I can go first. I feel like I'm going first a lot, so I apologize about that. But do we want to just go through the list of like what's the most anticipated, or should we start?
Should we go actually each say our least anticipated? We'll just go all around in a circle, and then we'll just
go
down that idea. All right, John, you start with your least anticipated.
All right, so I don't know that this is going to be a surprise to anyone, or if we're going to disagree, but my least anticipated is Aquaman.
And I'll jump in with my next one. My least anticipated is also Aquaman.
Wow. So to be totally honest, I don't have the full list of movies coming out.
Oh, honesty.
I was unprepared with this list. I do have my most anticipated, but
I mean, I'll just let you know yours is also Aquaman.
Okay, mine is also. Actually, I was kind of excited for Aquaman.
And so my reason is the DC universe that we see, DCEU, I guess they call it. It's really bad, just really bad.
I agree.
I saw Justice League, and there are no characters that I like. except for Wonder Woman, and they even managed to kind of tear her character down in Justice League, making her, instead of this strong Amazonian warrior with these great leadership abilities, they just made her kind of a sex object again. And I think that was evident from the number of shots from behind her looking up at her butt as they get ready to fight.
Very leery, yes.
Yeah, right.
And they made her a Bruce Wayne love interest. It seemed like they were maybe going that way with it. Yeah, a lot of head scratching choices. Yeah, mine is basically Aquaman for that reason too. Honestly, it's not even just hating on the DCEU. Almost every single one of these movies, including Aquaman, I'm going to be jacked up to go to. And I'm not going to lie to myself. Seeing Khal Drogo killing people underwater, I am all in for it. But just the track record alone makes it so I want to keep my anticipation at a level that they can't rip my heart out and Martha save it this time.
Oh, dude. Martha!
All right, I'm just going to go through a couple more of mine. My next two are Dark Phoenix and then Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. What about you, John?
That's the exact same order that I have it, even though I just was offended by the fact that you put Spider-Verse that low. Looks awesome, but Apocalypse, I think, fell off the rails. And again, this is a movie, I think that they're done shooting. Like, I think it's almost completely wrapped. But I'm just confused about if it's going to come out. I think they have said that it will. But I'm interested. Just, again, we're ranking movies on my favorite things, my favorite events of the year. And so I'm excited to see this one. I like Sophie Turner as Jean Grey. But we'll see. I think the Spider-Verse one looks incredible. I really like Miles Morales as a character. I like the idea of the multiple realities. But have you guys seen the trailer for that one?
I didn't. I was going to actually click on that today, and then I didn't get around to it.
I have not.
Troy, did you see it at all?
No, I did not.
It looks cool. I like the art style, but the animation is really weird. Like, when he moves, it looks like it's almost at 15 frames per second, which I don't know if that's a stylistic choice. I don't know why they'd release a trailer that looked like that. But if I'm going to see a whole movie that runs that slowly, it's going to look really, really strange. And so I think the story will be great. I think it's cool to see an animated Marvel movie get a wide release. But I have hesitations about it, I guess.
Yeah, the main thing I saw besides that, Miles Morales is finally going to be in a freaking movie, which is awesome. That one half of the Phil Lord, Chris Miller team, the team that made Lego Movie, they're I believe it's Chris Miller is the one that's actually writing it. Both of them are executive producers on it, but I think that Chris Miller's actually wrote the treatment for it, which is anything that he's written has been honestly hilarious. Those two.
They did the Jump Street remakes too, right?
Yep, and the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Just a ton of clever writing in all of their stuff. So I'm definitely stoked for that. A lot of my Dark Phoenix things are the exact same. Apocalypse just burned me. I got way too jacked up for Apocalypse, and it was way too mediocre.
Mm-hmm.
My next two, actually, I can kind of just pull all these together. Incredibles 2, then Venom, then Deadpool 2. I love the original Incredibles, but I don't get quite up to where I want to with animation as I usually do with live action, even though Incredibles is better than almost any superhero movie that's been made. And then the next two, Venom, this is where it was just basically splitting hairs because I'm so jacked up for every one of these. Venom starring Tom Hardy and the guy who made Zombieland, isn't it?
I don't know.
Robert Zemeckis, I think it is. And they're almost done wrapping on that. They're filming that in San Francisco. They've released a couple things for it now recently. I was a little nervous for it, but now that Tom Hardy's involved, I'm all in again. And then Deadpool 2 is... Deadpool 1 was one of the funniest things I've seen in so long, and I've seen it a million times, and I'm super jacked to see what they can do with the bigger budget and bigger ideas and a bigger overall universe. Did you put that in?
Yeah, again, I'm right there. Same list, same exact thing. Venom, I was really, really, really kind of bummed about because I was thinking, this is coming, and they don't even know if it's in the same universe, or they can't tell us. But I thought it was a project that basically seemed like it was going to go to die. But then I saw that footage from somewhere in Europe, some sort of con in Europe, where Tom Hardy came out in his Venom T-shirt, which anybody can put a T-shirt on, but he looked jacked about it, and he promised the fans, we're going to treat the character right. And I love Tom Hardy, and so I think that's a great choice for Eddie Brock. Second only, obviously, to Topher Grace, who nailed that role, and nobody complained about it, and everybody loved it. But no, I think it's cool. I think it's good. It's an unknown, but it's an unknown that I'm more excited about than Aquaman, I think.
I agree. Troy, do you got any Venom thoughts or any Deadpool 2 thoughts? Or
I actually haven't even seen the Venom trailer. I know, right? But I am.
There's not a trailer yet.
Oh, it's not. Well, anything about it. I haven't read anything about it. I just know it was being made and Tom Hardy, but I am pumped for Deadpool 2. I love Deadpool 1. It's hilarious. So that would definitely be my number one for 2018.
Oh, that's your most anticipated, Deadpool 2.
More than Infinity Wars, even. I know you're not going to like that.
Oh, dang.
All right, yeah. And then my top three are in reverse order: Black Panther, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Infinity War.
We got our first disagreement there.
What was yours looking like?
Mine was Ant-Man and the Wasp was my third. I actually have a former student who is a film student at Florida State right now, and she won a trip to go to Pinewood to see it being filmed, Ant-Man and the Wasp. And she said she knows pretty much the whole movie right now, but she signed like 20 NDAs, and so I haven't been saying anything about it. But I'm excited about that. I think it's because it's so far off, and so that I've got Black Panther as my second most anticipated. And I felt the need almost to say that Black Panther was my top most anticipated, but I think that's because it's closer than Infinity War. Because obviously Infinity War is going to blow everything else out of the water, or at least it should, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's my order is Ant-Man and the Wasp, then Black Panther, and then Infinity War.
And Troy, you said Infinity War would probably be right there with Deadpool 2?
Yep, and then I would go with Black Panther right there with both those. Kind of the top three, but I really love Deadpool. I don't know why. It's
so good.
Yeah, it's my style of that a-hole type movie,
Yeah, I had the similar battle with myself where I was so close to putting Ant-Man and the Wasp as my number one because the original Ant-Man movie, I've seen that more times than a human being should just watch any movie. I just love Paul Rudd. I love that it all feels. It's just all very fast-paced, kinetic. It's just I like pretty much everything about that movie. But I had to be
unreal how good that movie is.
Uh-huh.
Unreal how good Ant-Man 1 is.
I know it has no right to be as good as what it is, but when it comes down to it, Infinity War is. I can't lie to myself. I have to look at myself in the mirror every morning. Infinity War is going to be the best movie to come out next year.
It's been 10 years. 10 years we've been building towards this movie.
Yep.
Crazy.
All right. Now that we got that out of the way, I know our fans have just been clamoring for our anticipation list, so we just had to get that out. All right. Now, before I play the trailer and a little plot and then read the plot here, you guys want to give me a little bit on your background on what you guys, if you were going completely cold into this movie, just what your thoughts were when you originally watched the movie before anything coming into it now for this podcast review?
I mean, I definitely think I liked it a lot more. I just rewatched it, honestly, for the second time. I split it up between yesterday and today. I definitely liked it a lot more when I was younger, but I think that's a little biased because of all the great superhero movies that have came out. But then again, a lot of bad ones have came out. But yeah, I still enjoyed rewatching it. So,
all right, John, what about you? Do you remember when you saw it back in the day?
Yeah, and so 2005, I would have been in high school still, and I probably went to the Over Oakwood Theater to see that. And I remember thinking it was pretty good, I think. That was where we were clamoring for comic book content, right? That was before, a comic book movie came out every year. One of the things that blows my mind, though, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more, is that 2005 seems ancient, but Iron Man 1 came out in 2008. And so the fact that these movies were so close to each other really speaks to what can happen when good people get in control of a property like this. And so, rewatching it, I anticipated it being terrible, and I thought, it probably aged poorly like all the other old superhero movies, but I was pleasantly surprised. And so, I mean, we'll get into that a little bit more, obviously.
All right, yeah. And then I remember very specifically when this movie came out, like you were just talking about, John, that point was when a year before Spider-Man 2 just came out, 2 years before X-Men 2 just came out. So all of a sudden we were starting to hit this peak of high-quality comic book movie content. And Fantastic Four, I remember watching the cartoon as a kid. I was just really jacked up to go see it in theaters. I went and saw it with Troy's brother Ryan and two other friends, Tyler Manning and Josh Curry. By the time the movie ended, we also went and saw it in Viroqua. We were all so jacked up. We ran over to the Walmart across the street. We went and bought the Xbox game Fantastic Four, immediately drove back to Westby, and all played that for the rest of the entire day. So, yeah, I liked it. And now I've seen it a bunch since then, and definitely didn't wait 13 years or whatever. I've seen it a bunch since then, but I've always kind of liked it. Obviously, it's gotten warts and things on it the older I've gotten, just more critically thinker I've gotten. But, yeah, so that's basically it with me. Now we're just going to play a quick trailer, and then we'll jump into the review.
Exposure to a high-energy cosmic storm could advance our knowledge about planetary life to our future.
I don't trust him. We got what we wanted. Just worried about what he wants. Physical structure is changing. Oh, it's terrible nails. I think we're going to set independent. The cloud has fundamentally altered our DNA. That's gross.
Look at me.
I can't. He's eating it from his core.
You don't want to walk around on fire for the rest of your life, do you?
Is that a trick question? Come on, am I the only guy who thinks this is cool? What if we got these powers for a reason? I've always wanted power.
Victor, you always thought you were a god.
Let's not fight.
No, let's. Don't even think about it.
Never do. Flame up!
Oh, you're hot.
Why, thank you. So are you.
That Johnny Storm, huh? All right, so Fantastic Four, a group of astronauts gain superpowers after a cosmic radiation exposure and must use them to oppose the plans of their enemy, Dr. Victor Von Doom. Fantastic Four, starring again Johan Griffith, which I had to look up the pronunciation of that name no more than 10 times. Michael Chiklis, Chris Evans, Julian McMahon, Jessica Alba, and little Kerry Washington makes an appearance here.
Alicia Masters? Is that who she plays?
So let's go ahead and jump in with this. Now, just to give a little context with the movie, like we were talking about, the movies that came out around this time, Fantastic Four came out in 2005. Came out as the same year as Batman Begins,
Ooh.
Elektra, Constantine, V for Vendetta, Sin City, and then a few other lesser known: Sky High, Son of the Mask, Crow 4, and a Man Thing remake.
Ooh.
But yeah, the lining it up next to Batman Begins doesn't do too well for it.
Sure doesn't.
So let's just jump in right away with the story. It opens up with a statue of Victor Von Doom being built, 30-foot high statue. And Reed and Ben are just about to walk into Doom's office because apparently they're out of money. For some reason, Reed Richards, the smartest person in all of existence, has $0. They just don't even really want to explain that to us, what's going on there. So let's just skip that, apparently. And so they meet with Victor to pitch the idea of studying a storm in space because, according to Reed's calculations, it has the same properties of a similar storm that might have triggered the evolutionary early planetary life. So what do you guys think of any of the character introductions with those guys right away?
I'll go, I guess. I think the plot actually sounds really, really cool, right? This whole idea of these cosmic rays or cosmic radiation that gives them their powers. I think the way they explained it and said, this may be what kickstarted evolution really firmly roots them in the idea of science, right? Which is what Fantastic Four is supposed to explore. And it attempts to ground it. I know that it's not realistic at all, but it attempts to kind of give scientific explanations for how something like this might be possible. And I really thought that was cool. And I like that you alluded to, this person's the most genius man. How could he be poor? How could he be, lost on research and all those things? And that brings up a point of there's fundamental flaws to the characters of the Fantastic Four, in my opinion. And one of those is that this seems like such a hodgepodge of people who are supposed to be like Marvel's first family. And my biggest gripe is, can't they get people who are the same age ever to be around each other? And so I looked it up, right? And so Reed Richards in this movie, the actor who plays him, is 32. Susan Storm is 24. Johnny Storm is 24. Ben Grimm is 42, so why is he hanging out with him? He's an old man. And Dr. Doom himself, good old Victor Von, is 37. And so these people are so far apart from each other, and it never looked believable like this was a group of people hanging out.
Yeah, they even kind of allude to a couple things right away that they call Victor like Vic, and they talk about how Reed and Ben have basically been doing all of these things together for a long time. They give us a lot of shorthanded allusions that these people have all been friends basically since school back in the day. And
yeah, right.
That was one of the things that I banged my head up against too, is how is this old man friends with this young, how did they go to school together? And one of the things I wrote down was there's this economic storytelling being done at the beginning here that is so ridiculous that Reed and Ben talking about their past, then they're friends. Reed and Doom went to school together. Now they have a past. Reed and Sue used to date. Now they have a past. Reed and Sue used to date. Then they have a past. Sue and Doom now date. Now they have a past. Ben was Johnny's high-ranking officer, so now they have a past. Johnny, Sue's brother, so they obviously have a past. All of them have this one-sentence thing that gives them purpose to be in each other's life, and it's some of the laziest storytelling. I honestly don't mind it a ton, because it rolls everything really quickly. It's a lot of fluff, but since they aren't going for dramatics at any time in this movie, I kind of realized that I have to just put a lot of realism and shit just behind me, because that's not what this movie's going for. It's just going for a lot of plot convenience, and that's basically what all of this beginning shit reminds me of.
Yeah, right, and that stuff can be easily forgiven if these people look at all like they know each other from somewhere. Ben Grimm was 10 years old when Reed Richards was born, and so maybe he was his babysitter, and that's how they got together. But I mean, and that I'm being overly negative, but that's just one thing that always kind of jumps out at me.
For sure. Let's see here. So then the next transition, it goes to Johnny Storm making out with this woman while he's riding his motorcycle side by side with her car. Just a little shorthand to tell us that he's a ladies' man, while he's also kind of a dangerous man. All with just 1 second of screen time. And then it goes basically, we're 10 minutes into the movie and we're already in space. We're already at the space station, which is, like I said, if this is the type of storytelling they're going to do, then please just get me to what I wanted to get to and see the Fantastic Four becoming the Fantastic Four. And then they're in this ship and stuff. Do you guys have any thoughts on them being in space?
I kind of want to hear what Troy thinks about the way that the movie starts, being not, well versed in the comics. And so I obviously have a thing that I think about it, but I want to hear how Troy thinks that storytelling works at the beginning.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you guys. I think it's pretty poor. It's just like it's a cop out, like Trevor said. It's just you understand the background of the characters, kind of how they know each other, but there's just no depth to it. There's nothing that you react to that makes you care about it. So it really is a lazy way to get the story told, which is noticeable, of course. So I agree with you guys. It's not ideal.
For sure. And yeah, they basically, so I wrote down a ton of notes for this, obviously. And basically my first note on almost every character goes from something like Sue never steps out of role as prize love interest.
Oh, that's so true, right? And after we just talked about Wonder Woman being this great step forward for women characters, Sue, I mean, the inherent sexism in her character, that her power is to become invisible, I think it's clear there. But the fact that she's this dangling prize of this battle for good and evil between Reed and Victor is preposterous, I think. Right?
I never put together, because I know these characters were invented in the 60s, so they all have the political correctness of the 60s, but I never put it together that that she's invisible, because that is the way that the men drawing her wanted the woman to be, and they're like, oh, that's good.
I mean, it's terrible, but
yeah. But ever since then, she's had to have evolved in the comics a lot, huh?
I don't think.
Yeah, right. I think her character is really, really, really awesome, and I've got a bunch of notes on the comics for later on, but her character is definitely much stronger there than it is here.
All right, and so then they're up in the space station. We see Victor getting extra creepy, proposing to Sue by calling it a promotion. So, I don't know. Victor von Weinstein, probably.
Oh, jeez. Topical.
And then dating the episode. And then what happens is Ben's out. They don't really clearly define what they're doing in the space station, but Ben's out getting samples before the storm comes, and then the storm is going to hit, and then that's kind of just when everybody panics. They try to save Ben. Victor tries to shut them all out in his glass shield doors. The reason why they're using his space station is so he has these doors. And then that's kind of when they get hit with all the cosmic rays and everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then the next part we show is we wake up and we're getting a POV of Ben Grimm talking to Johnny Storm after what we assume as the audience is them getting their powers. Did you guys like this scene? You guys like the joke? Do you guys remember the first time seeing it, or if it tricked you, or?
It probably tricked. I think it actually tricked me the second time I watched it just the other day. I thought it was pretty clever. I probably would have reacted the same way.
For sure. It definitely plays on our expectations there, and I like it a lot, especially because Chris Evans, as much as he was just looked at as like the jockey jock back then, he really is just a good actor who sells basically every single scene he's in. And so then we realize that he hasn't mutated yet. They're all still fine. Sue is in a like passed out or something in the hospital, and everything just seems normal. They just have to sit around the hospital until Johnny Storm must have gotten a call for a Mountain Dew commercial, because that's what happens there at that next point where there's no snow outside of the hospital, and then all of a sudden they're in the freaking Alps getting dropped off by a helicopter to do snowboarding at the highest level possible. Where does this come from? What is going on? You guys have any thoughts?
I mean, I think you see obviously convenient storytelling. You took a page out of the Triple X handbook because it reminded me of good old Xander Cage himself. But I think that this is the movie's greatest strength, but also its greatest weakness as well. And so, a little earlier, we were talking to Troy and I were talking about how they all get different powers. If they're all impacted by the same thing, then why are all their powers different? And I think it explains this in the movie. So just let me know if I'm wrong on this, but I think it talks about how the Rays like magnified their personalities. And so Ben Grimm is rough and tumble and has this harsh exterior, and so obviously he turns into the Rocky Thing, right? We talked about how Sue is demure and very shy, and so she turns into the Invisible Woman. Johnny Storm is obviously a hothead, so they light him on fire. And so I think that their powers being this physical manifestation of their base traits, I think is really, really, really cool. I think the problem with this movie is that it's not just an origin story, it's 5 origin stories. And so now, I mean, you've been walking through it basically scene by scene. So now for the next 40 minutes of the movie, we're seeing each of them learn their powers, each of them use their powers, each of them come to terms with their powers. And it's just doesn't really leave a whole lot of room for the movie to breathe. And so I think, they do a really cool job of showing all of the characters, but it doesn't leave room for any other elements of the plot. And so I do like the Mountain Dew commercial comparison, right? And so I just want to know what you guys think about that and what you guys think about the way that they kind of processed all of those scenes together.
I think that's really cool, too, how they manifest their own personalities like that. I didn't even know that was mentioned, so that's why we were wondering about it. So it definitely makes sense. And, two, I noticed rewatching it, you guys probably noticed this, too, when the rays do hit them, it actually does a little bit of a glimpse, like Johnny gets like a little flame, and Sue goes invisible. I thought that was pretty cool, little detail, but I guess that makes sense. I didn't know that was the reason why.
I did like that nice touch that it was alluding to it. I'm in the same boat as you, Troy, is that I didn't hear them say anything about the personalities coming into the fact. I was kind of guessing that specifically because the hothead thing is so obvious what they're trying to go with Johnny. And Ben Grimm, Michael Chiklis' character, is so the stern guy. But I think the problem is, and the main thing that I come up against, is that they might be trying to do this with all of the characters, but 3 of the actors aren't able to sell anything that they're doing. Even though the 2 characters of Ben and Johnny, played by Evans and Chiklis, are given the same material as everybody else, they're for some reason to sell me on some of this hokey stuff, like the Mountain Dew commercial that should be terrible, but for some reason Chris Evans is so charming while he's doing it all, you're forgiving him for having a Mountain Dew commercial in the middle of the Fantastic Four movie.
I think this is hilarious that you're talking about Evan selling you on this, because when I watched it, I was like, man, he's not like this brash and arrogant and what's the word, impulsive person. I thought he was just an awful, terrible person. Like the way that he rags on Ben, the way that he disregards everybody else. I was like, there's nothing redeemable about Johnny Storm at all, throughout the whole movie. And I think that's funny that we had such different views on that point. But I mean, you definitely see Chris Evans and his skills as an actor, because he's so different in this than he was than he is as Captain America now.
For sure. And I shouldn't say that he's selling me on his likability. He is likable to me. And I think I do forgive him for a lot of his character traits, and that's probably because Captain America is Captain America. But the thing that it comes down to for me is Jessica Alba doesn't sell me that she's the quiet, person that's going to become the Invisible Woman. The whatever personality trait she's supposed to have that coexist with those powers manifesting, I don't get any of that from her. Or they give a line about Reed stretching himself too thin, but besides that line of dialogue, I have no idea what that even means as a personality trait. Or Doctor Doom, I don't know why he becomes this metal man that has anything to do with his personality besides the fact that he was in the blast doors is the reason why he becomes this metal man. But the personality, like none of Johnny does have the personality of he is the irredeemable hothead. They don't even really try to give him a arc really in this. Well, they don't give almost anybody that a great arc in this movie. But so that's what I mean by he's selling me on this stuff is just as an actor, you can just tell that him and Chiklis are pretty much on a different level than everybody else besides Kerry Washington, who's in the movie for 5 minutes.
Well, yeah, and I totally agree with you. I know that I'm kind of going out of order here a little bit, but
no, I like it.
This is why the Fantastic Four movie that came out in 2015, I think it was also terrible, right? And everybody said that movie was bad, but I was like, I'm going to watch it, I'm going to see it. And I watched the first 40 minutes of it, and I was like, this is fine. Like, this is okay. And then in the last half of the movie, that's where things fall apart, right? Because they build this origin story for 60% of the movie, and then everything is done in 20, 25 minutes. And they fight the biggest villain, not only in Fantastic Four, but sometimes in the Marvel Universe. They beat Doom in 25 minutes. And it's just this rush to a conclusion that I feel, really, really hinders these movies. And you said, nobody is really given a character arc. And the closest thing to it is the Ben Grimm arc, where he tries to deal with himself. But you can see, he breaks up with his girlfriend. He meets a new blind woman who loves him for who he is. He depowers himself. He repowers himself, all in like 30 minutes maximum.
And how did he repower himself? Because he didn't have enough power to unpower himself, and then he automatically hit the switch, and now he was him again. Did it explain how that worked?
Yeah, I had that similar question, actually, John, if you were able to answer that one.
Oh, God. Like looking for some logical reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so that's just, we're chalking that one up to convenient storytelling to a whole new level then, huh?
Well, yeah, absolutely, right?
All right, well, so then what happens next? Obviously, the Mountain Dew commercial ends with him making the hot tub. He flames on accident, so we see their powers are starting to manifest. Ben, Sue, and Reed are all having dinner. When Ben's got to leave because there's something going on with his chest or something, we're getting the idea that all of a sudden these are all starting to hit them. We see them use their powers in about the lamest way possible. Sue just starts to become invisible talking to Reed, and then Reed catches a bottle of wine with his arm that stretches about as long as my arm could probably stretch. and then after that, Reed goes into the uses his powers to get into Ben's room, and Ben is then now full on changed into the Thing, but we don't see him. We just see a giant hole in the wall. And then after that, we must get Ben going to find fiance Deb. How do you guys feel about the fiance in this movie?
Terrible. Like, there's just no logic, of course, but she's been engaged or married to this guy, and she sees him and just immediately is like, yeah, don't even come talk to me, get away from me. Like, you'd think you'd at least be like, okay, what the heck happened? What's going on? And then,
yeah, they just don't give us any insight into what their relationship ever was, and so we don't care that this is happening at any other level besides she's a grade A B word, right?
Right, and they talked about how. Oh, sorry, but they talked about how, like he mentioned, he has like the best relationship and how he's so lucky and all this, and then it just turns into that. So they gave us a little glimpse that it was supposed to be so perfect, but.
And she doesn't even ask. She doesn't even say, "Tell me how you turned into this orange brick monster." She doesn't even care how that happened. She's just like, "You get away,"
For sure. And then just like Troy was saying, they do give a couple lines of dialogue about how I'm having this awesome marriage, but it's like everything else is they're trying to invest us into these different qualities and character traits in people without us they're telling us everything instead of showing us anything, which is honestly driving me nuts at this point. I'm not disliking the movie at this point at all, but I have almost zero investment in anything that is on screen at this point, and it's not great. Right after that, we get Ben Grimm sitting on the bridge, and which is going to lead up to our first action scene in the movie, and we're probably getting closer to 45 minutes to an hour into the movie, so usually that's when you need another action scene. We haven't had one since basically they turned into the people at the space station.
Well, no, the Mountain Dew snowboarding.
The Mountain Dew commercial, yep. And so do you guys have any thoughts on anything that goes on this entire bridge scene? I got a couple.
Yeah, I gotta say, I did not like it at all.
We see our first example of them using the sexualization of Jessica Alba to sell the movie, right? And this is something I looked up in research, and I want to talk about the costumes after a little bit, but as I was kind of looking at them again to kind of remind myself of what they look like, in all of the promo images, Jessica Alba has her suit zipped down so her cleavage is showing. And in the film, that never happens. Like, she never wears the suit like that. And I don't know, like, that obviously is of a different time, maybe. I mean, that still obviously exists in film today, but it just is so dumb, right? It reminded me of when Pamela Anderson played her in Superhero Movie, the other paragon of cinema.
Yeah, a lot of that. Honestly, we're talking about like gender politics from the 60s. A lot of this movie doesn't do too well on those things too. A few of the notes I have written for Sue Storm, besides I said never steps out of the prized love interest role. Only real character trait, and this is partially on the actress, but I give it a lot to the writing, is that only trait I'm picking up from her is she's beautiful.
Yeah.
She's rarely bringing any positivity and energy to any scene she's in. And I also wrote hired to strip down. Because that's it. And this is one of the things that really bothered me with this scene is maybe you guys can explain this to me. Maybe there's something I missed. So Ben Grimm tries to stop this guy from jumping, right? Then the guy falls off. He's scared of Ben. Ben basically creates the accident to save this guy. And then the Fantastic Four, or the three of the four, come to see what's going on. I guess I'm not even sure how all of this is all happening within such a short, condensed spot. But then again, convenient storytelling. But for some reason, they need her to get through the crowd of people, even though her powers don't allow her to phase through objects. So she just has to push through people like they would have to do as well, except for she would just be a butt-naked woman doing it. And then for some reason, they're waiting for her on the other side after she puts her clothes on. So they didn't need her to do any of it. And they tell us it 2 seconds later by them being on the other side.
And so you mean that the crowd is so tightly packed together that they can't fit through there? It's almost like you need somebody whose power is to stretch themselves so thin that they could slip through. They simply don't have somebody like that.
Oh, gosh. So
I
didn't miss that, right?
I do think the idea behind it was the cops were blocking it off, so they wanted someone to go get Ben. But definitely, like, once she stripped down, they were all just right there anyway, so it was a completely pointless scene.
For sure, because that is, yeah, their intent was definitely to tell us that she would be sneaking by, but then she wasn't sneaking by, and then they beat her to the other side somehow. Like, oh, man, that was honestly, I just had a couple, what just happened there moment. And also, in this same scene, this is where the movie's just telling me straight up, this ain't going to be serious, is the dog covers its eyes. The dog in the fire truck covers its eyes with its paws.
That's some Little Rascal stuff right there.
Oh, my gosh. It really was telling me what movie we're in. And then, so after that, Sue distracts, being naked. They all use their powers to contain the accident, which is, I'm assuming, one of the flagships of any Fantastic Four comic, is that it almost takes the whole of their powers to get rid of the problem.
And we'll come back to that in a little bit.
Which is definitely, even though the execution in this movie is poor at best when they do these things, I do like a lot of these concepts, like them using their 4 powers not to even fight off anybody, but to contain an accident and to just, it's all about saving all the civilians and stuff. It's really, even though I never read old school comics, I'm assuming that's what all the old comics used to be like before supervillains, is that they had to solve a problem that wasn't created by some Doctor Doom-like character. So I did, honestly, despite all of me being upset about some of the stuff around it, just the overall idea of the scene, I was on board with. I just wasn't on board with any of the execution.
Yeah, I didn't know that they're better when they're as a unit, because I hated that scene basically because it like just takes turns showing this person's power and this person's power, and it's just such a cliche and basic simple way to do it. But hearing that it's because they're better together definitely makes it a little more understandable, I guess.
Yeah, like I said, it is just the execution in that scene, because like you said, it is just flash to one character, then the next character, then the next. So you aren't even really getting a sense of them working together, but they're just trying to convey that idea just not very well.
Yeah.
And then, because like we all know, New York City, it's a tiny place. So the fiance that just left him the night before is on the bridge with the ring in front of the entire crowd that the Fantastic Four couldn't get through, and she's for some reason waiting there. So they're done with the convenient storytelling, I take it then. Then after that, Reed promises Ben to save him. Reed promises Ben he's going to save him. He'll change him back, which is basically going to be the whole forward thrust of the next half of this movie, is Reed trying to figure out the powers. And then the other thrust is them becoming celebrities as the Fantastic Four, getting interviewed. This is kind of, even though, again, the execution, and they never do much with it later on, except for one scene, the idea of them being celebrities and having the general population be into what they're doing is such a different concept than almost any other superhero stuff besides like the original Superman movie, where they know they're doing good and everybody else knows they're doing good. But like I said, you don't really see this in almost any other part of the movie again. Did you guys have any thoughts on any more of the bridge stuff?
Yeah, there's no menace that Spider-Man kind of has. And really them coming out as the Fantastic Four, even though they're mad about it, even though Reed and Sue are mad about it, there's really no risk involved. And really they're just lauded and celebrated for it. And so I was kind of glad that they didn't really retread that, because there's not really any conflict that happens there. But we've been very, very negative about the movie so far, even though I think we all somewhat like it. But them coming out as the Fantastic Four gives this movie one of the best parts about it. And I think the costumes that they wear are so good, especially for 2005. They didn't go all black leather like the X-Men. They didn't have, a fabric circle cut out and glued to the chest like in the Fantastic 1994 movie. They looked, usable. They looked unifying, and they didn't say, well, why would these people wear a costume like this? Because that's not realistic. They said, look at these things and look at how cool they look when the whole team is showing up wearing them as well. And so I don't know what you guys thought about the costumes, but I actually really, really thought they were good.
Troy, do you have any thoughts on the costumes?
What?
Do you have any thoughts on the costumes?
No, I agree. I like them a lot too. They're like you said, they're not too flashy. They're not too plain. They're not corny at all, which saying a lot. So yeah, I liked them
for sure. And that goes back to like the efficient, fluffy storytelling. Is they definitely give a line right away about the reasons why they're going to use those suits in space. Because taking out of the context of a superhero movie, it's ridiculous that they do wear those in the space station, obviously, instead of, like astronaut gear. But all it's doing is setting up something later. And since it's almost just trying to set up a universe that's parallel to a real universe, and the dog covering its eyes is a good way to see that this isn't a real universe. I'm pretty much all in. They do a lot of things really well when it comes to shorthanded for figuring out the way they call them the Fantastic Four, the way they all get their names, the suits. Johnny's the flashy guy, so of course he's going to sew a 4 on it. He even says they need something else, and then he points to his chest where he's going to put something later. a lot of shorthand and stuff. But for that type of stuff, I think the shorthand works well because those aren't character traits or anything. They're just something that people want to see that's seen the comics or cartoons. So I agree with a lot of what you said, John. And then the next part of the movie, let's see. They arrive at the Baxter Building, and we get a cameo from a certain Mr. Stan Lee, who, of course, did not invent, or he did invent with Jack Kirby, and he plays their mailman. Is the mailman? He's a comic book character, right, John?
Oh, dude, you mean Willie Lumpkin?
Willie Lumpkin, yeah, that's what it is. And I did read, or actually I heard in audio commentary that Stan Lee was supposed to just have one line of "How you doing, Mr. Richards?" or "How you doing, Reed?" And before the scene started, he pulled Johan, the guy playing Reed Richards, to the side. He said, "All right, I know I'm supposed to say this, true believer, but for 5 minutes, let's just go back and forth riffing." And so they did riff for about 5 minutes, and 2 seconds of it makes it in the movie. But apparently there's this long cut of him just going off the rails, making up all of his own dialogue. Which is very Stan Lee.
That was a pretty good Stan Lee impression, and it sounded like if you melded Stan Lee and Hulk Hogan doing a Hulkamaniac speech together, and I really, really, really liked it.
Yeah, the further I went into it, the more I was losing it. But the true believer part is always pretty easy. All right, and then so basically at this point, the movie turns into a series of gags. We haven't talked much about the director. Tim Story is who they've chose. Before this, he made the movie Barbershop, which is a decent hit, and is actually a pretty decently funny movie. It's just basically a series of people improvising and riffing off each other within a barbershop. And so what they did for this movie, since 1994, which John has alluded to a couple times here, they made a very, very low budget Roger Corman version of Fantastic Four. And ever since then, they've been trying to make this movie. And let me see, I have it in my notes. They had, right after the Roger Corman movie, Chris Columbus, the guy who made Home Alone 1 and 2, or Mrs. Doubtfire, he was going to make the next Fantastic Four, and he spent a couple years developing it. And then Steven Spielberg gave up the directing opportunity for the Harry Potter movies. And so Chris Columbus jumped ship, went to the Harry Potter franchise. And then from then on, from like 97 to when it got made, there was about 20 different writers on it, about 15 different scripts that were made. And then they finally brought on Tim Story after they made a release date, and they just needed to get it made. And Tim Story had this mild hit of Barbershop, and then he was coming out with a different movie called Taxi that didn't get released before this movie was made. Otherwise, he most definitely would not have been allowed to make this movie because it was
Jimmy Fallon.
Yes. And so, but basically all they did was Tim Story decided he could take all of these different scripts, take all the best stuff from these scripts, and then he could make all of the character parts, all the riffing parts, all the gags parts. Basically what the entire middle of this movie becomes is what he would do. And then all the other professional people that have worked with special effects and worked on these big budget scales, they would fill in all the other parts around him, which I didn't know almost any of that until researching this for this. And it makes sense because there's a lot of disconnection from just scene to scene in general.
Yeah.
You guys have any thoughts on any of that?
I mean, yeah, like you just said, that scene. I mean, there's so many scenes in this movie that they just don't parlay into each other at all. It's just you could switch out so many scenes and put them anywhere else, and it wouldn't change the movie at all. So it's
that is so honestly, I didn't even kind of think about it that way, but it is true. I wrote down a list of these scenes after I put movie turns into series of gags, and these could go anywhere during these time periods, and it would make just as much sense. Ben can't ride the elevator. The suits from space. Sue chased down. This was one that drove me nuts. Out of nowhere, Sue was just on the street being chased down by fans. Another strip scene, but there's nothing before it. There's nothing after it, and it makes no sense within any context of anything. But so all of this is honestly stuff that I don't mind, and it makes the movie go by pretty quick. So it must be doing a decent job. It's just none of it's memorable. None of it's holding on to me in any way. None of it's sparking my imagination. None of it feels epic superhero or anything. It just feels like gag after gag after gag after gag after gag. And it's not good. But in the background of all of this, somebody we haven't talked about basically at all is Victor Von Doom, who has now lost mainly all of his money. He's lost most of his investors in his company, and he is starting to become deformed slowly with these powers he's getting. You guys have any thoughts on any of the Doom stuff?
I really like the character arc of Doom, and I don't know how much of it I'm filling in versus how much of it is reality. But to see that he lost everything because of Reed builds such a great dynamic and such a great rivalry, right? He lost basically his fortune, he lost his company, he lost the respect of his peers, he lost Sue, he lost all of these things, and now he's losing his greatest asset, which is his handsomeness, I guess. And so the vanity and the pride and the arrogance that comes out in him, I think, is manifested very well. I don't think that his powers are explained very well. Especially because in the comics, Doom is so much involved in like dark sorcery and blending science and magic together, which again makes him such a perfect foil for Reed. But I really like the reasoning, at least, behind why Doom is the way that he is. And so, what do you guys think?
Troy, any thoughts on Doom?
Yeah, I agree 100%. That makes a lot of sense. So I was kind of wondering too why, immediately he just hates these other guys, wants them to lose their power. He wants to be the only one in power. But it makes sense, all that anger, he lost everything. So definitely does make it, brings a little more light to what I was thinking.
For sure. One of the things I read, so Jack Kirby is the one who originally invented Dr. Doom, right? John?
I don't know. I don't know a lot about like the origin. I know that he and Stan Lee were there for issue 1, so...
I just read this one thing that Jack Kirby said, and I thought this was, I'm assuming it was a shout out to Jack Kirby, is that he never showed Doom's face. I don't know if that's still a thing, if people still don't know what Doom's face looks like in the comic, but apparently he never drew what his face would look like under the mask, and he said if he ever did, all he would have is one little scar on the side of his face, and he's so vain that that's the reason why he needs a mask. And so eventually they show him with just one little scar, and he said he wants to be shot from a certain angle and everything. And I thought that was probably a shout out to Jack Kirby. And I thought that was kind of cool. It gave the character a little more depth and gravitas than probably the actor could ever hope to give it. Again, a lot of these things come down to, I understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. Like all the reasons you broke down, John, for why he's becoming their foil, all conceptually works for me. Just none of the execution is working. He's become so far removed from everything else in the story. It is ridiculous. And the actor just doesn't sell it. The two main actors in this movie that should be selling me on their parts is Reed and Victor. And they're the least charismatic people in the movie by a pretty wide margin. And Dr. Doom, I haven't read almost any Dr. Doom stuff, but anything I hear from any diehard comic book fan is that he's one of the best, if not the best villain in all of comic books. And that is not, I never get that for 1 second from Dr. Doom. If I came into this completely cold, I would never leave the theater being like, oh, that's the Joker to Reed's Batman. That's the Luthor to his Clark Kent. I would be like, oh, well, that was his Mole Man to Fantastic Four.
Nice Mole Man reference, dude.
Thanks, man. And then let's see what I wrote down. Yep, not grandiose enough, not charismatic enough. He has a metal skin instead of a metal suit, which is one of the things I know from him from the comics, right? Is he's basically does the Lex Luthor thing where he builds himself a what are those suits called?
This is like a set of armor.
Ooh.
I don't know what kind of suit you're talking about. Like almost like a Darth Vader style life-sustaining suit. Is that what you're talking about?
Suits that just strengthen your body. I can't remember what they're called. Mech suits, right?
Yeah.
And I did like that his powers were manifesting slower because of the fact that he was behind the blast shield and everything. There's good enough reasonings there. He just is not integrated enough, and the actor's not ever giving it what it needs when we're showing him. And I wrote it in big letters, he is boring. Because that's just the main thing. My main thing that I just keep coming up with this is that even when the material's not good, there's a couple people that are selling it in the movie, and then there's 3 other people that aren't selling it. And that's, Sue, Reed, and Victor. There's a couple scenes here and there, but and so after the gigs, we have Ben going to a bar and meeting Alicia Masters, played by Django Unchained's own Kerry Washington. Do you guys have any thoughts on Alicia Masters?
I really like her character. I think Alicia Masters is a really cool character from the comics. If I'm not mistaken, I think Alicia Masters was white in the comics, which I think is really cool. That in 2005 they recast. Recast the character as Kerry Washington, and obviously the Michael B. Jordan Human Torch 2015 debacle shows you that even a decade later, people aren't ready for that. But I thought that was really cool. It kind of opens up another, I guess, social commentary issue about it. I'm going to talk about some comic book stories a little bit later, and this is a main plot of a comic that I think is really good, but a very subplot of the movie here. But I think that, laying the seeds and laying the foundation is really cool. And especially because she gives Ben this motivation that he ultimately needs towards the end as well.
Yeah, I did like Kerry Washington in the movie. She's probably one of the better actors in the entire movie. They just don't almost give her anything. I think it comes up to the issue you were speaking about earlier, is that this is just an origin story for too many people. And so whenever they try to give them, like, Chiklis can pull off these roles and these arcs that they're trying to give him, but they just aren't giving him enough content to play with. I do like the idea, though, that, love is blind, all that stuff. And so the Thing is finding love through this person who's just a good person. I wish she was in it more, but I do like that they introduced her and everything. And so she's going to have a really beefed up role for the next movie, I'm assuming. And then the next part I got here, Johnny finally leaves the house. They're done with the gags. He leaves the house and he goes to another Mountain Dew commercial. This might be the Diet Mountain Dew version or something, but he goes to a dirt bike place that looks like an X Games and does some stunts. Kind of starting to learn how to fly a little more. One thing I didn't mention is that in kind of the overall background of Johnny's character is they've been playing with the fact that he can fly, but he doesn't know how to fly yet. We saw it a little bit snowboarding. We see it a little bit in this scene. It's kind of like almost his only arc. And then right after, he names all the Fantastic Four right outside of there, which is, I thought it was a pretty cool, honestly, organic way to do it. Johnny's the flashy guy, so he's going to give himself the cool name of the Human Torch and call Ben the Thing because he's been giving him crap the whole movie. So, yeah, I liked all that stuff. I don't know if you guys got any thoughts on any of that.
I'm a little off of that, but, you said he called him the Thing. I kind of like those two character dynamic. Shit. My cat just fell off my window. Their dynamic, what I like that I noticed is that, they're the ones gagging on each other the most. But what's cool is that Johnny wants nothing more than to have these powers, and the Thing wants nothing more than to get rid of them. So it's kind of cool how they're the main, I think they gag on each other more than anyone else. So they have that kind of cool dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. They're definitely, like I said, the actors by themselves are my favorite two parts, but their dynamic with each other, their playoff with each other. It's probably the reason why I do like Johnny as much, is because I never think he takes it to too far of a level. Because they mentioned earlier that he used to be his boss, or Ben was Johnny's boss, and now Johnny kind of has something over on him. Just overall, I do like the back and forth. It does get a little bit a little sour here to another level after the stunt scenes. But I do really like all of that. And I guess I didn't even put it together that Johnny is the one that loves his powers and Ben is the one that hates his powers, and they have their conflict with each other the whole time. But it's easy. My favorite part of the movie is those two going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say it gives them so much to do, right? And while we're moving at breakneck speed to introduce all these characters and give, story through exposition, like you said, these characters are ones that actually feel lived in and have real conflicts, right? Johnny is kind of causing conflict for everybody else, and Ben is trying to avoid all this thing. And so, Troy, I think the way that you said that is really awesome, and it shows why those two characters shine much more than the others, which are involved in a very basic and frankly uninteresting love story, which is how we learn who they are.
Right. And that love story is through the whole movie. I think it's just so drug out.
Yeah, for sure.
Agreed. Little side note here. Have you guys seen the show Bones or Angel?
No.
Are you going to talk about David Boreanaz for some reason?
Yeah, he was originally cast as Ben Grimm in this movie, and he ended up dropping out at the last minute.
Oh, dang.
Which would have been a super different movie, but I thought that was interesting because Chickless is, like I said, like my favorite part of this movie with Chris Evans, so I couldn't imagine Angel in this movie. All right, so yeah, then the next scene after that, we start to realize Doom's plans are starting to come into place. He wants to take out Reed Richards, and the way he wants to do it is he wants to take Ben out first, because Ben, they give a little line of dialogue at the beginning, is that Reed does the talking, Ben does the walking. So take a walk, Ben. And so they have this scene, which is so ridiculous, where it's them sitting in a diner with each other, and he's wearing his trench coat and everything, and it just looks, because it's played as dramatics, 100% this scene is played for dramatics, and it is not dramatic, and it looks so ridiculous to see him sitting in that foam costume in that diner, biting forks off. And then after that, so then Sue takes Reed out of the lab. Reed's been really tired. He's been just working on trying to fix Ben throughout this entire second half of this movie. So Sue thinks he needs to take a break. And Victor is just sitting and trying to manipulate Ben into thinking that Reed isn't trying to help him, and all he's doing is trying to get Sue into bed. And so, as time would have it, they go back to the Baxter building, and Sue and Reed are just getting back from a date, and so Ben basically turns on him, and Ben and Reed have this little fallout, which I did think they finally did show Reed's powers, and probably the coolest way they show it in the entire movie is when he just wraps himself up in the thing to show how strong he can be, which kind of goes against the fact that Doom needs to beat Ben, because it looks like Reed is the strongest, smartest of all of them, so you'd think he would be the one you have to go after first, but I don't know. And then, let's see here.
Well, one thing about that, I like to call that part the Mighty Ducks moment, because it reminds me so much of when Fulton and Dean Portman see Coach Bombay eating ice cream with the Iceland chick. And so immediately they're like, oh, my God, he's talking to somebody from the other team. He must be, planning to murder us all. And so it's just that idea of a total misunderstanding. Like Reed, stepped away from trying to cure him 24/7 for like an hour. And so obviously he's given up on him and betraying his trust. And it's just, again, it's quick and film storytelling at its best. And so shout out to Emilio Estevez there for giving us.
Duck man, dude, D2. I like the reference. I did not have D2 go through my head at all through this movie, and now I regret it.
It's rare that I have a day where I don't think about Mighty Ducks, and so I'm glad to exercise that.
Look what Bombay did. All right. And so that makes Reed feel guilty enough that now he's just going to try it on himself, even though he doesn't know if it'll work. And this is where this part of the movie was set up with him being poor, when him getting to the Baxter building and him having a ton of freaking bills that he hasn't paid. And so apparently he doesn't have the electric power in his building to power this machine well enough. The smartest man in the world can't figure out a way to come up with more power. Any thoughts?
It's ridiculous. Plus, not to mention that, I mean, we're going away from logic here, but he's got a huge facility in like a Manhattan skyscraper, which has got to cost $1 million a month just to rent. But yeah, like you said, he should be able to figure out to draw electricity. And I mean, doesn't it, when he tries to run it, doesn't it make the building and other buildings flashlights too? So it's clearly drawing power from somewhere else.
It is the most unexplained thing that they try to explain somehow with him being poor, but it's not like if you don't pay your bills, they're like, we're going to give you 15% power this month. You either get 100% or zero. You don't get to choose having power if you aren't paying your bills. None of it makes sense. And can he use Johnny's powers as some sort of way to get energy, since Johnny is a sun, basically?
Right.
Can he solar anything?
And they have that scene in the movie where they test his energy output when he says, "Don't go supernova." So, like, clearly they have the ability to measure it at least. Now just plug a USB into that thing and you got it powered.
You go a couple solar panels, anything. Oh, gosh. But then, so that goes back into the power plot point for Victor. And for some reason, I didn't mention this either, Victor has monitors in Reed Richards' apartment. This might be the most convenient part of the entire story, is that anytime he sees something in that apartment, in those monitors, he can just do something about it immediately without him organically set up in the plot.
Big brother.
Yep, exactly. And so he realizes the machine's working, needs immense power, and so he goes and he reverses Ben Grimm's power. And Ben calls him Vic no less than 15 times in this scene, which drove me nuts. We're like, okay, I get it. You're his previous friend and you have trust in him now, which is what they were trying to convey. But it was driving me nuts.
They've got to establish that they're bros now, though. Without Vic, how are we supposed to know that?
And so, obviously, Victor beats up Ben, goes to Reed. Reed's power's too unstable to fight. Then Victor, whose face is now getting more scarred up by using his powers to shoot Ben, by trying to shoot Reed, he needs to figure out a way to maybe cover it up, maybe come up with a costume. And luckily, he looks to his right, and there's a Doctor Doom mask there for him. Any setup to that, you guys remember?
I was going to say, I love the fact that his use of his powers ruins his face, because obviously there's a hugely thematic message of that. Is like, what is he willing to risk to gain this power? I 100% missed that he just looked and the mask was there. I don't know if I was looking away or what was happening during that part, but that makes me laugh a little bit.
Did it show the mask early on in the movie, though? Like,
the one foreshadowing it did is the very first frame after the credits is them building that skyscraper. Or they're building the statue of him, the 30-foot statue. And the very first frame is a zoom up on the statue's face. And it looks a lot like what the Doom mask is going to look like later. It just has like what looks like little rivets around the head. And then it's more his face than what the actual Doom mask is. Besides that, though, I don't remember like any setup of like him having mask fetishes or anything like that. But yeah, so that part was nuts. I'm glad at least John was still all in enough on the movie to pick up on themes from him using his powers. At this point, I am trying so hard not to check out on the actual deep metaphors that they're trying to give me in this movie with just one or two lines of dialogue. So I commend you. And then after that, Doom, like Doom does, has a rocket launcher all of a sudden. I don't know where he gets the rocket launcher from. I think they showed him take it from a crate or something.
no, they had it from their.
Those crates are all over the place in New York.
He did say to Reed something like, "This is from our old military contracts" or something. So they did throw that in there.
Those lines of dialogues they give. See, at this point, I'm just having a hard time even keeping up with some of those because they're not even trying to properly set it up. But like,
I'm glad this titanium alloy that you and I invented when we were friends in college, when we were friends and when we liked each other as friends, will make this mask now. Thank you.
In school, yep. But I do like, again, this is where I'm just like in the bag for this stuff. I'm all in on the rocket launcher scene, though. This is where we finally get to see Johnny flame on, and we finally get to see him control his flight, and we get to see close-ups of him in pure Human Torch mode, and I am digging every second of this.
This final fight scene had so much potential to go wrong, but it was so good.
We're gonna have something to talk about. And then first of all, the way he gets rid of this rocket, this is where I start to lose. They start to lose me again. He gets rid of the rocket by seeing a coal barge, which definitely is populated with people. People are on those types of ships, and he decides that that's what he's going to light on fire and have the rocket go to. So let's say everybody got sick that day besides the guy who actually just runs the ship. So there's one guy on there. He's
killing that like one person.
But I'm assuming there's somewhere between 10 to 20 people on that ship that are all dead because he can figure out a different way.
Is it for sure a coal ship? I thought it was one of those bins or those big floating garbage things they throw out in the ocean sometimes.
I thought it was a coal barge. I do know what you're talking about, but I don't even know what those are called. But I'm pretty sure that those boats also have people on them, right?
They're called garbarges. Thank you.
And let's disconnect.
Thank you.
But then right after that, the climax begins. Set up a little earlier in the movie, we get the prototype of the Thing doll. It's clobbering time! And so Ben realizes he made a big mistake. His friends are getting beat up. They're going to get killed. And so, like we talked about earlier, I don't know if there was any setup, but he goes back into the machine that Victor is not helping him power anymore at this point.
He knows how to run it also.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And so at this point, I literally just wrote down no stakes. There were zero stakes to what is going on in this. So we go into, they're all on the street. He thinks he killed Human Torch, but then they all have this corny way of that they're like, nope, I'm in the fight too, Victor. And he's like, oh, no, I thought I got you. And then he's like, oh, no, but I'm in the fight too, Vic. And he's like, oh, no, but you changed. What's going on? Now there's all four of you back.
Oh, I have something to say about that part.
All right.
As that's building, right? There's this line that Victor says where he's like, the three of you are no match for me. So I girded my loins for the cringe that was coming when they would say, no, but four of us can. And they didn't do it. They showed restraint, which I never expected would happen. So that's one reason that I liked it, is they avoided these corny dialogues that we see in every other superhero movie. So there's one positive.
You're grading on a curve right here.
I am, and I will. I'll continue to.
And then so this is the scene where, again, the idea, I absolutely love the idea. Each character's power is being used to defeat Doom. We have set up earlier in the movie, Johnny Storm, you never go supernova. You never go supernova. So check off supernova. He's going to eventually go supernova in the movie.
Okay, this is something that's called Chekhov's gun, and it's an old literary term where if they focus on a gun in the first act of a movie, you know that that gun is going to become important later on, and it's going to be used for some, very, very obviously important reason. So Chekhov's gun is something I'll talk about constantly, and supernova is that for this movie.
Did you hear me just say check off supernova, right?
Oh, I thought you meant like check it off the list because we're going to see it again.
I thought you were mocking me. I was like, I obviously know what this means. I just used it as the example. Yeah.
I'm going to set my computer.
Check off gun. I was kind of hoping for a bigger laugh when I said check off supernova, and now I realize that you didn't.
I was just ready to look so smart and cool. So
I didn't know what that meant, so I learned something.
And so, yeah, they set it up earlier, the supernova. The force field contains the supernova from the Invisible Woman. Ben, because he doesn't have a wrench, has to use his super strength to get open a hydrant. Literally,
very much minimalized his role in this.
yes, they completely made him go back to the rock monster that has ruined his entire life just to break open a fire hydrant and aim it at the guy who's doing the real aiming. Because all Reed does is direct the water that Ben is acting like he's directing. So this is where, again, conceptually, I am all on board with what they're trying to do. But when it comes to actual execution, no. The force field, I kind of on board with that because they did set up Supernova killing all the world. The Ben breaking the hydrant thing is like, Ben, why? They didn't need your help. They didn't need you to go back to being this rock monster. You could have lived your normal life. And why can't he change back after?
Oh, dude, that is a quandary that will exist for years, decades of comic book questions in Fantastic Four lore. But this part goes back to what Troy said, right? With they're better together than they ever would be apart, and that's awesome the way that they finish this. And they don't say that as the key part. None of us alone will beat him, but together we're more than match for him. Like, those lines are so dime a dozen. If you look at the Lord of the Rings, which is maybe one of the greatest film accomplishments in history, there's this part where Eowyn says she's in this battle, and it's like, no man will defeat me, and she's like, I am no man. Get it? Because I'm a woman, and like that's such low hanging fruit that they take, and they don't do that in this movie, which again, I respect very much.
I do agree. They do a lot more showing than telling in the scene. Obviously, like I said, I'm not on board with all the execution, but I do like that they're trying to show. We kind of glossed over this earlier during all the gag parts when it was showing them basically just being domestic, being a family. Like, that type of stuff I do think sets up this type of stuff later. Even though it's a bunch of gags and bits that don't have any resonance within the audience or the story or anything happening, it shows them actually making real, genuine connections with each other, even if those connections are being annoyed at the guy who can turn into fire because he's a pretty boy and you're this ugly, hideous monster, or Reed being so aloof he can't pay attention to any of the symbols that the most beautiful woman in the world is giving him at every second of the time. But they do set up a lot of these different things in those bits, that them working together and them being a family and them being whole is when they're at their strongest. And that is when they aren't doing a lot of show don't tell stuff, but they just aren't giving any of it weight, any stakes. So you aren't feeling any of the stuff. I'm seeing this happening. I'm understanding what's happening. I understand why they're doing it. I just don't feel any of it at all. I have no feeling at all during any of this.
And I totally agree. Like, I never was emotionally invested in this at all, other than, oh, look how cool it is to see these people in action, right? In live action for the first time. And so there's no emotional investment that I have. There's no, like you said, I'm thinking way deeper than you probably have to when you watch this movie. And so, absolutely, those domestic scenes are the important things, and then that popcorn exposition and popcorn action is something that I don't really care about at all.
Agreed with all of that. Spoiler alert, I cried 3 times in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I didn't know any of those characters. And I do it every single time I watch it. I know these characters. I should be feeling what is happening on the screen at this point. And it's the part that bums me out the most in the movie. Is the movie honestly flies by. It's something that I've watched a bunch and can watch a bunch. It's just, there's just nothing that is weighing me into what is going on. And then, so they break out the line that Doom used a couple times on Reed, Chemistry 101 or whatever it is. What happens when you insert, but the one Reed does is what happens when you rapidly cool hot metal. And then Victor's like, no, please, no, oh my God, I'm Victor, please do not do this to me. And this part kind of freaked me out when I originally used to watch this, of like, so is he alive under this metal stuff? Like, is this the equivalent of him being buried alive under metal? Or is he dead?
Yeah. I think it's quite literally the Man in the Iron Mask, if you remember that. And he's entombed in there. Surely he's in there good.
Yeah, I know he shows up in the sequel, so I guess they are saying he's alive, but that scares me. That if there's anything that's emotional resonant, it's that this guy is completely frozen in metal. And it's like being buried alive. He has no movement or anything in his body. That makes my heart race even just thinking about it.
Well, after he's been horribly mutilated and burned from this hot iron that's melded to his skin, you have to assume as well. And so they're really throwing believability and science out of the window. But I'm glad they did explain why they wore costumes, because I was worried about that one.
All right. And then we get to the last scene in the movie. They're having a party on the yacht. We get a proposal with Reed and Sue, which was kind of cute, even though we didn't go much into it because there's not much to say. There's no chemistry between Johan Griffith and Jessica Alba throughout the entire freaking movie. So, like, I even kind of forget that this part happened until I just rewatched it again. That they propose, or he proposes at the end. And then they have a joke between Johnny and Ben about Johnny calling wide load. Johnny jumps in the air, flame on, makes a 4 in the air, and he's gone. And before we go full credits, we get an after credit of Dr. Doom being loaded up, which I don't think they say in this movie, but we find out in the second one is being brought to Latveria.
Mm-hmm. Very like Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of ending. Put him in this nondescript, shipping package, which is dumb because obviously he's a dead corpse in the middle of that metal, like you said. But,
but yeah, you are right that it was Super Raiders for sure. Okay, well, that's the movie, guys. You guys got any last thoughts or anything before we come up with a score for it?
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about this. I was going to save this until afterwards, but I can say it now. Is this movie had, I think, a lot of potential and a lot of promise, but for me, I just don't find the Fantastic Four compelling anywhere. A couple different things I wrote down were Fantastic Four is an amazing comic, not because of the 4 characters from the main team, but because of the other characters that it introduces. Silver Surfer and Galactus are some of my favorite characters of all time in Marvel history and in Marvel lore. Dr. Doom, like you said before, is this great villain outside of the Fantastic Four. They reintroduced Namor after he was in the Invaders in the Timely comics of the 40s. They introduced Kang the Conqueror. They introduced the Skrulls and the Kree and kind of started off, Marvel Comics, Marvel Cosmic, which ultimately led to the Inhumans and the Guardians and all those things. And so I definitely respect the lore of Fantastic Four because of those things, but I really don't like Mr. Fantastic at all. He's one of two things, right? He's either this wholesome, family man that's fun for all ages and Marvel's first family, or he's really a heinous, arrogant, horrible person that gets them in the most trouble, right? He builds this prison in the negative zone ultimately to hold all of these heroes and villains during Civil War, and ultimately gathers the greatest resistance known to man, right? He tries to create this Illuminati, this secret society that can, safeguard the entire world, but ultimately keep secrets from everybody. He, creates this clone of Thor and ultimately results in the death of a hero in the Civil War. And so all of these decisions that this supposedly the smartest man in history makes are terrible and ruin everything. And so there's never a likable Mr. Fantastic that I can find. The Thing, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, those characters I can get behind, but so much of Fantastic Four is rooted in Mr. Fantastic that it's not something that interests me on a base level. And so that's just kind of what I think about this.
I do kind of like that dynamic, though, of that you just explained, that I'd never really thought about it like that, is that there's almost a way that if the comic was called Dr. Doom instead of Fantastic Four, you could look at it Doom as being the person that's trying to do the right thing, and Reed Richards is the one that's the radical in the situation, and he's always the one that's going too far for his means and things. I like that. That's kind of cool. That's honestly way more interesting than anything we just watched in that movie. That's awesome.
Yeah, right. I think that, I mean, looking at it from Doom's perspective, I think it's cool. And that's something they play with a lot more in the comics as well.
Troy, any last thoughts before we give this thing a rating?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with John about the can't really get behind the characters. See, I've never really read the comics or anything, so I don't know a lot about them. And the movie, it was fun, it was entertaining, but it didn't get me behind them like Batman or Superman or anything. And with the other terrible remake, it's just one of those things that if they made another one, I don't think I'd be super stoked for it, right off the bat. So, I agree with them.
For sure. I do agree, honestly, with that point. I was so jacked to see this movie when it came out, and I wouldn't have been so jacked to see the second one if it didn't have Silver Surfer in it, because it did just made you feel underwhelmed when I left. Well, not when I was a child and left the theater, but just now if I would go see it and leave the theater. Just, yeah, it's super underwhelming. But anyways, now we got I don't know if I got a review from either of you guys, but this next segment we're going to call the Roommates Review. And so every week we'll get somebody that's in one of our lives. We'll get them just to write one short little review, whether they watched the movie with us or they've just seen it previously. I got a review from my roommate, Deanna. She wrote up for me earlier today. So I just wanted to read this before we do our final review. 2.5 stars. Okay, but so when I was younger, I loved this movie. It had everything I like in a movie: fighting, superheroes, and of course, romance. Now that I'm older and I can appreciate it for what it is, an okay movie, watching it now, I think it is cheesy and feels forced. It's your standard superhero movie with a happy ending. Good always trumps evil. But let's face it, if it is on, I'll probably still watch it because Jessica Alba is a babe, and who wouldn't want to watch a movie with her in it? 2.5 star.
I think she's the target demographic of the people who made this movie.
All right. So now we have a specific rating system for our Super Friends Reviews podcast made by our very own John Strand. John, do you just want to give them a quick little overview of it?
Yeah, so we wanted to do something a little different than the typical, five-star review scale. And we all watch other podcasts and other things like that, and so we tried to come up with something that could be our own. And so one thing that Marvel likes to do is they use a lot of adjectives to describe their heroes. The invincible Iron Man, the sensational Spider-Man. Sometimes, obviously, we have the Fantastic Four here. And so something that they've been doing lately is they're not using such great superlatives. And so there are some of those adjectives that are a little bit more negative inherently. And so we want to use a Marvel-specific scale to kind of explain this. And so it's still a 1 through 5 scale, but we have different words that kind of correspond to each number. And so our number 1, which is the lowest, is irredeemable, which means that there are no qualities about this movie that are great. And that comes from the Irredeemable Ant-Man, a really great comic. Number 2 is unworthy, from the Unworthy Thor. And that's one, obviously, that it has some problems, some issues, but overall isn't a great movie. For 3, we've got Victor Von Doom himself with Infamous, which obviously people know it, but not necessarily for the right reasons. And then as we move to the higher end of the scale, our number 4-star review would be Amazing, like the Amazing Spider-Man, and then a 5 best score you can get would be Uncanny, after obviously Uncanny X-Men. So we're going to try that around, workshop and see how it goes. And so, who's going to review first?
Troy, you want to jump on first one?
Sure. I didn't know about this scale till just now. I'm going to go with a 5 Uncanny. No. I would give it an Infamous. It isn't. I'd say it's mediocre. It's right in the middle. It isn't terrible. We did, I think, bash it more than anything through this whole podcast. But, it definitely is, when you just watch it for the entertainment value, it is fun to watch. It can be corny and forced, but, it's like Trevor, you said you've seen it a bunch of times. I've only seen it a couple, but, if it was on TV and I was sitting there, I wouldn't necessarily just change a channel. It's I'd just say it's mediocre. It's Infamous at best. So, but it's fun. That's my 3, Infamous.
All right, we got an Infamous from Troy. John?
I'm going to go with an unworthy on this one, which would be the 2. I was kind of going back and forth with it, but we got to have a lot of room on this scale, right? And so a 3, we're working basically, with that's half your scale that you've already used. And there are clearly worse movies than this. There are clearly a lot better movies than this as well. And, there are things that I like about it. And so there's no way that I'd put this all the way down at the bottom. I think that there are great things that it did. But overall, the campiness of it, I think we've learned that we have to expect better. I think the idea of these vignettes, these scenes that don't really fit together, kind of puts it away from achieving really anything really great. But there were those high moments. So I think I'm going to go with a 2 and unworthy on this one. And it's definitely the best of the Fantastic Four movies. And so we'll give it that.
Wow. Damning with some real faint praise there right there, John. All right. I'm kind of basically on the same page as you guys. I've been going back and forth between an unworthy and an Infamous. Even though I've been bashing a lot of this the whole time, I think I'm going to go with the Infamous as well. I was just kind of at a war with myself throughout the entire movie. I was on for the campiness. I was on for the fluff. But then when it came down to the end of the movie and I just had, like I said, no emotional resonance with anything going on, I was just kind of bummed is probably the only word I would use. Is I just wanted to feel more when I got done. But then the more I watch it, the more I realize how easy it is to watch. It's super, super breezy to watch. It's just, all fluff. It never really takes the time to define struggles of the team while making any sort of compelling story arc at all, which is that and the 3 of the leads cast are my biggest problems with the movie. There just isn't actual conflict that you end up investing yourself in. But like I said, I'm in the bag for it. I enjoy Chris Evans' Human Torch a lot. I enjoy Michael Chiklis's The Thing a lot, even though I'm not always on board with the costume. Overall, I think it holds up about as well as I'd expected it to. And, go a little Infamous for Fantastic Four 2005.
Nice. And so outvoted Infamous it is overall, it sounds like.
We can all just have our individual ratings, but if we want to just completely overrule you, then that's what it would be. All right, so that's the end for us. Hopefully we can maybe do this next week or in a couple weeks or something like that. We'll figure some stuff out off camera. But otherwise, thanks for whoever is watching this live. And, whoever will listen to this eventually, maybe in our back catalog or something like that. But we appreciate the time with us, and thanks a ton. We'll see you guys soon.
Bye.
See you guys.